Please work. Oh, shoot, guys. It looks like Twitter is not going to allow me to stream, I would guess, for the duration of this trial, which is quite unfortunate because that is by far and away the biggest source of my viewership online. So that's really really unfortunate, I have to say. But I'm pushing people towards Rockfin more and more because they pay creators, they don't censor, and they actually got live chat too. They have ways to tip if people want to tip during the stream. So, nonetheless, I got my looks like 10th YouTube channel, Addy Ads 10 up as well. And we're still on Facebook. So, Facebook hasn't touched me yet. Still on Twitch at Addy Ads. Still on PeerTube at vid.addyads.us. But again, looks like Twitter is not allowing me to stream, which is it's pretty sad to say the least. But let's get I'm going to do a general overview real quick, and then for those that want to stick around a little bit longer, I'm going to get into the details of days 2 and 3. I'm going to work backwards, so I'll do day 3 today first, and then I'll do day 2 yesterday, and then update that on my Substack at addyads.substack.com. And I do want to say a plug really quick that it is very expensive here in New York City. I don't understand why or how people live here. It's pretty ridiculous. So again, if all my followers were to give me $1 on Twitter, I would have an actual salary. But if you do want to help out, even just $1 or $2, my Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, Substack are all in the description box, as well as my Patreon if people want to do that. But again, Patreon has been known to censor people. Fortunately, not myself yet. Knock on wood. So if you do want to help that way, please do hit the subscription wherever you're watching this, and be sure to share. But again, the best spot to get the quickest updates are on my Twitter at one ads one spelled out. So let's get into this. We had witness Sean examined today by Comey to start off the day, who was, or excuse me, was the boyfriend, is the ex-boyfriend of Carolyn, who gave a testimony yesterday, quite dramatic. And his testimony was very corroborative of Carolyn's, and testified to many things that provided corroboration, such as the fact that Epstein sent Caroline lingerie in the mail via FedEx from New York. So very specific corroboration there with regards to that, as well as the house, the appearance of the house. It was initially painted pink and later white. And he didn't mention the white, but Caroline did. But they both corroborated each other with regards to the pink color, as well as the fact that they would, quote, drive around and smoke pot. That was another corroboration for Caroline. So nothing really explosive as far as new information from Sean, but really good corroboration, which I think is going to aid the prosecution more than the defense. And next up was witness Nicole Hesse, who was examined by Allison Moe of the prosecution. And she is currently a CNA and a young children's teacher. And what's her connection to this? She worked at the El Brio Way house, maintained the house where when Epstein and Maxwell were away. She was hired by Ghislaine Maxwell. She also gave a description of the house, corroborating that Maxwell was her boss, and she would do things like maintain the air conditioning, etc. And she was messaged to give, or she was given instructions by message pad or via phone. And there were government exhibits that were admitted as evidence that were shown and verified by Nicole Hesse. And again, she worked part-time until 2004. And next up was the pilot. And this is a really interesting testimony here. He was first examined by Comey and then cross-examined by Everdale. He was hired by Visosky, and excuse me, he hired Visosky. He himself was hired by Epstein in 1991. In July of that year in Columbus, Ohio, Visosky and David Rogers worked together for almost 30 years as Epstein's pilots, 28 years together. And we'll get into the details of that. But again, just quick overview, and then I'll get into the deets. But the cross-examination of the pilot by Christian Everdell was probably the highlight of the day. I got to say, I said this on my Twitter earlier, I think Christian Everdell is probably the most charismatic a lawyer in the courtroom for the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. As it stands today, I would say the least charismatic is also on the defense, and that would be Polyuka. Not too many people impressed with him so far. But again, examined by Comey, but cross-examined by Everidell. And the big part, I think the wow moment for a lot of people came when Everdell was trying to assert that it wasn't possible to prove that witness Jane from week 1, if you remember that, was not this, excuse me, was the same person or could not be determined to be different than another Jane. Again, Jane's a pseudonym. So the tie-in is Epstein had an assistant with the exact same first name. And a bit aggravating, but on the flight manifest, they didn't put the last name. So that's why Everdell was able to attack that point of contention against the prosecution. And I thought he, at the time, had got a big win for the defense until the pilot testified he did not meet Jane number 2 until 2003, some 7 years after he recalled, he met witness Jane in 1996 in November. He himself does not personally recall it, but he trusts the flight manifest as a pilot of discipline for that. And then Comey rounded off the the day by asking once again, pointing that out, and also the fact that Everett pointed out the fact that the pilot felt comfortable leaving his daughter, he has a single daughter, around Epstein. So that being said, let's get into the details here for those that are interested in what happened there. Witness Sean, going back to the beginning of the day, he's 38 years old from Akron, Ohio, a salesman who grew up in West Palm Beach, went to Wellington High School and Survivors Charter School, former boyfriend of Caroline, who worked, Caroline did 4 to 5 years at Arby's, and then for Jeffrey Epstein, and met Jeffrey Epstein via Virginia Roberts. And Sean himself met Virginia Roberts in 2001, as well as Tony Figueroa, and they would hang out together. Again, the quote is drive around, smoke pot. They went to the El Brio house, again corroborating the pink appearance of the house, and then the white appearance later after the paint was changed. Another corroboration was the fact that the money was paid in $100 bills. Every 2 weeks, they'd go to Epstein's house, and Sean and Caroline broke up circa 2005. Sarah Kellen's name also was brought up several times today. Kellen would call Sean for Caroline to go to Epstein's house, as well as 2 other women, unidentified by Sean other than via their accents. One of them had an English accent. The other one had a French accent. Corroborated also that Caroline's mom would also receive calls for Caroline to go and work, quote unquote, for Epstein. Sean met Epstein just once in his driveway, very briefly, and Caroline met Maxwell at Epstein's house, again corroborating Sean did the FedEx lingerie gifts from New York. Melissa and Amanda, who were mentioned yesterday, also went to Epstein's house, and Sean was actually dating all 3 girls at the same time: Melissa, Amanda, and Caroline. A government exhibit was a picture of Melissa's birthday party, which was admitted under seal, so we were not able to see that. And just an aside, Sean actually got a 2015 conviction for possession of meth, and then a 2017 conviction for felony possession of a firearm. And again, Sean would use the weed that Caroline made for drugs, the money that Caroline made for weed, ecstasy, and cocaine. And I went over pretty much all that I said about Nicole Hesse. Very short testimony there. And Sean was briefly cross-examined by Polyuka, stating that majority of the messages left on, that was Nicole Hesse, the maid or the house manager part-time, briefly cross-examined by Polyuka, stating that the majority of the messages left on the notepad were for Epstein, and she would only take messages when she was there, and Epstein was not, so they didn't really interact that much. And then the big witness of the day was David Rogers, chief pilot, which I didn't know. Visosky was actually the co-captain, who was the pilot that testified last week. 1991 to 2019, almost 30 years, 28 years for Jeffrey Epstein as chief pilot. Again, first hired July 1991 in Columbus, Ohio, and he himself was the one who hired Visosky, who was the co-captain and director of maintenance, responsible the co-captain is for safety and maintenance procedures, budgeting, and scheduling. And he was the captain from 94 to 2004 before they switched. And Visosky actually became chief captain, and then Rogers was the co-captain. He said they would mostly fly to one of Epstein's houses, either in Palm Beach, Florida, New York, Columbus, Ohio, or to the Zorro Ranch. And the first time they went to New Mexico and the Zorro Ranch was in 1993. And the first time they went to St. Thomas, the airport, so that they could go to Little St. James, was in 1998. And either Epstein himself, his secretary, or Ghislaine Maxwell would relay the instructions to the pilots, whoever the chief pilot was, on when the flights were. The pilot testified that Maxwell actually was number 2 in the hierarchy under Epstein, saying she worked for Jeffrey Epstein. And as a property manager, office manager, she would be number 2, was the quote. Rogers points out and identifies Maxwell during the testimony today. He saw her at her house, the airplane, or the office, but they wouldn't interact that much. And among the houses listed was the 59th Street house near Columbus Circle in New York, the Upper East Side house, which has been mentioned many times, an apartment on 84th Street, and the townhouse on 56th Street, which was moved to in the late 90s. Very large house, 5 stories tall, 67,000 square feet. And then in fall 1991 to the 59th Street house in Manhattan, and early 92, late 91 to the Upper East Side house. He stated he only ever say hi or hello to passengers, and of the planes they used was a Gulfstream, at least a G280, and then a twin-engine Cessna, which is a relatively small plane, and then a Boeing jetliner as well, which they piloted later when Epstein bought a Boeing. He couldn't observe what passengers were doing on any of the planes, although he did keep a passenger manifest, aircraft log, and then a personal log, which acted as a personal flight manifest. Which, again, this passenger manifest included the date, trip number, departure, and destination, as well as the passengers, although sometimes unnamed, and as well as the engine times, and then the aircraft landings. The passenger manifests ended up being turned over to Epstein's attorneys, as well as the FBI. His personal log included date, destination, flight time, passenger names, but only the flights that he himself was a part of. And the logbooks were submitted under seal. They were shown to the public, but of course, the list of the names of the passengers were redacted, much to the disappointment of everyone in the room. And they would list the various flights, many flights that went over, the destinations and arrivals. Wilmington, Delaware to Teterboro, and Teterboro, New Jersey is probably the most oft used destination and departure point for Epstein that I could see, going many times between Teterboro and Palm Beach International. Again, he would not always know the name of passengers on board, and when that was the case, he would write PAX for passenger and then the gender, either male or female, and most of the time it was female. Aspen, Colorado, and Traverse City were mentioned, Traverse City being the closest city to the Interlochen Center for the Arts, which they would attend nearly every year in August, although there was one flight where they went on the last day of July to attend kind of the yearly show there at the Interlochen Center for the Arts in Michigan. Again, some crazy destinations: Van Nuys, California. There was a Tangier, Morocco. Obviously, Santa Fe, New Mexico is mentioned. Columbus, Ohio, of course. And we'll get to Columbus, Ohio in a bit here. Rogers met Jane again on 11th of November, 1996. And this is key because we're going to go back to Jane in a second here. Flew with Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and others. He saw her 4 times, according to the manifests. And this is the continued examination by Comey. So continuing on here, other cities: Geneva, Switzerland, Paris, France. The very next day, they went from Paris to Canada. Really ridiculous how these are most powerful and wealthy people in the world. They'll go to a country across the world for a day, for 12 hours, and then leave the next day. And it's like, what's the point? Do you want to check on make sure your refrigerator's not running in your house in Paris, your apartment in Paris, and then you go back to Canada? again, Tangier, Morocco, Granada, Spain, Luton, England, Bangor, Maine. But again, Titterboro, New Jersey seemed to be the most off-traveled place for Epstein and Maxwell, who often accompanied him, as well as Virginia Roberts, who attended the flights. I had the exact number here, but it was in the 30s, some 30 some times. And then again, of the unknown passengers, most of them were female. I think only one I saw today was male. Don't quote me on that, but the point is most of them were female, as well as St. Thomas, of course, to go to Little St. James, and then I think it's called Cahokia, Illinois. It's kind of hard to hear sometimes with the microphones, and that's something too. Is when I first got there this morning, there was some microphone technical difficulties, so we couldn't hear for a bit. But getting to the cross examination by Everdell of Rogers, the pilot. Went over some basic stuff, how he and Vasosky switched positions after, and he became the co-captain. Vasosky became the captain. And Epstein would sometimes introduce guests to Rogers, but not always. Everdell pointed out he'd see passengers, that is the pilot, when exiting the plane for customs. The pilot claims he never saw minors unless they were with parents or a nanny, but otherwise no minors. So interesting there. Jane, as well, he claims, testified under oath, also appeared 18, as well as Virginia Roberts. But to be certain, he wasn't checking IDs, but he thought they were adults. The pilot also testified he never saw sexual activity of any kind with minors or otherwise, but couldn't see the passenger area. He claims also he was never instructed not to leave the cockpit or not to mingle with passengers, or any rules about what he couldn't do with passengers. No rules were given to him. Very rarely would he use the bathroom in flight, such that he could see what was going on in the passenger cabin. And in the Gulfstream, the bathroom's way in the back. He would use it very, very rarely. Never saw any sort of intercourse or activity that way when going to the bathroom. Never saw any paraphernalia, such as clothes, sex toys, used condoms, or anything that suggests sex on flights. During the 90s, he'd speak with the secretary more often than not when receiving flight instructions. But when he would speak with Ghislaine Maxwell, it meant that she herself would be on the flight. The pilot also recalls Leslie Groff and Sarah Kellen meeting her in September of 2001. Vysotsky would speak with her instead once he became the chief pilot. So the chief pilot was kind of in charge of the logistics and scheduling of the flight with either one of Epstein's assistants, such as Leslie Groff or Sarah Kellen, or Epstein himself. He felt that Kellen was more of Ghislaine Maxwell's assistant before becoming Epstein's primary assistant in late 2001. Kellen would do things like arrange luggage, transfers, and flights. He was also asked by Everdell, "You wouldn't necessarily be told who was on the flight," which he responded, "Correct." Kellen was a frequent passenger, initials SK, and Rogers would send manifests to Jeffrey Epstein almost every single month at the end of the month. He had no reason to believe that Maxwell was reviewing manifests, kind of implicating or implying that Maxwell didn't have the opportunity to, after the fact, change the manifests, either adding people or subtracting people from them. They also talked about the companies that owned the flights, owned the airplanes themselves. JEGE Inc. owned the Boeing. Gulfstream was owned by Imperial Air, and then a Bell helicopter, which was bought in 2002, was owned by Air Ghislaine Inc. And that was the same Bell helicopter that presumably Epstein went on flights when he would leave his prison sentence in Florida. He bought the helicopter from Sikorsky through Air Ghislaine, and Rogers worked for Glider, which is a real estate company before Jeffrey Epstein, before becoming his pilot. And the idea here with buying different aircraft with different companies is to kind of protect liability in case there's an accident with the aircraft, so you don't lose those other aircraft in case of a tragedy. So the lodge was owned by Epstein at Interlaken, and he would presumably go to camp there in August, although the pilot testified he didn't know for sure if that was the case. He was interviewed, the pilot was, by the FBI in August of 2006 for the first time, And in February of 2020, on the 7th, he was interviewed by the prosecution with his attorney present. In the meeting, he was off by a couple of years of when he estimated first meeting Jane, which again was 96, 11th of November, based on the flight logs, which again only refers to someone by their first name. Other people with the same first name, and if you've been following this case for a bit, you may actually know who that is. I'm not going to say who it is just because I'm going to wait till after the trial. But Epstein had an assistant, a personal assistant, with the exact same first name as pseudonym Jane, witness Jane, who appears last week. And this assistant had a verified romantic relationship with Epstein. The name is spelled the same way, which only adds to the confusion, which Everdale really tried to go after today. The kicker, Ben, the kicker came when the pilot testified under oath that he met Jane number two, who was Epstein's assistant, not until 2003. So that's some 7 years after that 96 meeting, thereby under oath determining that it could not have been her. And in fact, it was witness Jane who was there in 96. Although he did say it's possible that there are other people there that who never met. And I believe that was Everdale asking him that. Other people mentioned Gwendolyn Beck, Glenn Dubin, Eva Dubin, the children of the Dubins, Emmy Taylor from Britain, as well as Jane, and of course Jeffrey Epstein, who was on every single flight, and Maxwell, as well as Marla Minsky from MIT, and it looks like a Kenny Drecke, also a teacher. I'm sorry, Henry Drecke, a med school teacher, and then a chef, Adam Perryline, I believe it is. Might be mispronouncing that because they say the name once, and if you don't pay attention, you can't hear it. So I may verify that later, but that's kind of tertiary to what happened today. Also, Mark Epstein's name was brought up. I'm not really sure why Everdale did that, but it was determined that no flights with Jane and Mark Epstein ever occurred per the manifest, as well as an unnamed female on that flight who could have been Jane. And Les Wexner's name was also brought up, one of Epstein's clients. And he also testified, the pilot did, that trips to Columbus generally meant that Epstein was visiting a Wexner. And Wexner has a house in Aspen, Colorado, which was also brought up. Annie Farmer. This is big, people. Are you familiar with the name Annie Farmer? Asked Everdale. And the pilot said he does not recall seeing Annie Farmer on flights. Not aware to his memory seeing a Kate, excluding the logbooks. So again, those flight manifests really are playing a huge role in terms of the evidence. Likewise with Carolyn, but he said, I'll have to check my log to be sure, my personal log. That was a quote there. So the question here is kind of the memory, the personal memory versus the flight log. What's going to hold up more? I would say the flight log, really is helping out the prosecution here a bit. But again, the fact that he said he didn't see Annie Farmer is pretty big. And, more on Annie Farmer, I think tomorrow. I won't say it in this, but we're expecting to see her by now. So that's all I'll say on that. A little bit suspicious that that's happening. And also brought up was the fact that Epstein lived in a Palm Beach rental while the El Brio house was seeing maintenance, as well as the fact that Epstein and Maxwell maintained separate houses, and he couldn't tell they were romantic until sometime after 91. However, later in the 90s, Epstein and Maxwell broke it off. I never saw Maxwell pregnant. And again, Carolyn appeared around 2001, although there were other assistants. And also brought up was that I believe his name is Ted Waite, co-founder of Gateway Computers, was dating Maxwell by 2004, possibly trying to imply a correlation between romance and trafficking, or simply presence in Jeffrey Epstein's life and the likelihood of complicity. That's a question there. Maybe saying that because Maxwell and Epstein grew apart and they weren't living together, that may imply that Maxwell had nothing to do with the criminal conspiracy of trafficking, right? I think that's probably what Everdale was getting at. Again, received subpoenas for the flight logs in civil litigation, and the FBI via the attorney. And I see some questions here. I'm going to get to them in a second here, people. Flight logs were in the hands of the plaintiffs and the lawyers that were suing Epstein. Also brought up was the fact that Epstein paid for the education, private high school education and university education of the pilots, both pilots. And this particular pilot, Rodgers, has one daughter, and he claims that Epstein took an interest in seeing his daughter succeed. He also felt comfortable as a father of a daughter with Epstein being around her. Never heard Ghislaine Maxwell say anything or do anything that made him think that she was complicit in criminality, which I think is very, very interesting indeed. And I'm just going to go briefly over what happened yesterday because I didn't do a stream. I was doing a couple interviews, so I kind of ran out of time. The Menninger cross-examined FBI agent Kimberly Meir. Lots of photos of Epstein and Maxwell were submitted. And as a matter of fact, the thumbnail that I'm using for this video was one of the photos submitted yesterday by FBI agent Meir, or confirmed by FBI agent Meir and submitted by the prosecution as evidence. And also, just going over the highlights here, the advertisement that was on the computer of user GMax. Who's that? Ghislaine Maxwell, of course. Help wanted. Are you a massage therapist? Work in Palm Beach home. Excellent pay. Mostly weekends. Please call 351, yada, yada, yada. Metadata 2001 as well was shown. And again, the user who created that, GMax, Ghislaine Maxwell, right? But again, Everdale, who is really, I think, doing a pretty good job for the defense, brought up the fact that you couldn't, for sure tell who was the person who used the account GMax to create that advertisement. And again, witness Caroline was on the stand as well. Really dramatic testimony, 7th grade dropout, former drug addict, of painkillers, cocaine as well. And she talks about earning $300 a trip because that was a lot of money to her at the time. Her mother was an alcoholic, very little support at home. So that didn't help. And it was kind of par for the course in terms of being an ideal victim for Epstein and Maxwell. Very little parental support, if any at all. But she did have the wherewithal to kind of reject being traveled to the island, presumably. She said to either, I believe it was to Maxwell, to one of the members of the group, I'm too young. I'm 15. I'm too young to go travel. And again, Sarah Kellen brought up again, would call, or Caroline would call herself. And she also testified, which I think is big, the fact that Kellen called her and then about doing a photo shoot, which Sarah Kellen then executed this photo shoot with Caroline while she was nude and underage, which, as far as I know, is production of child pornography. Where is Sarah Kellen getting arrested? That's what I want to know. She also testified to Maxwell filling up her body, her boobs, her hips, and her buttocks. I told her she had a great body for Jeffrey Epstein, which, as far as I know, is sexual battery of a minor. That would be sexual battery of a minor, wouldn't it? Am I wrong here, people? Why didn't Ghislaine Maxwell get any sex crime charges? Nobody can explain this to me. Again, Sarah photographed Carolyn nude after saying she'd pay her $500 to $600 for the work. Quote, I told them I was only 15 and I couldn't leave regarding traveling. But she made the trip to Epstein's house to do massage some 100 times over the course of 4 years before she said, quote, that's when I realized I was too old because I became too old. How old were you? 18. And that's why she stopped going to Epstein's house, because she became too old for him. She currently takes methadone and Xanax for anxiety, as well as an anti-schizophrenia drug, because she hears voices that say her children are going to be trafficked, probably as a result of her own trauma. And that is something that was brought up too. She testified that she can tell the difference between reality and not, and truth and falsehoods, despite having those schizophrenic episodes at times. The 2009 claim saw her earn some $250,000 for Caroline, and $1 to $3 million from the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, which was a lot more recent. And then again, Polyuka did the cross-examination, which many people called either sleazy or they were somewhat disgusted by it. That's something too, is people are kind of poking fun of her intelligence, which I didn't really appreciate. Caroline didn't seem to understand the tactics that Polyuka was using. And other things too I wanted to mention is Menninger did a decent job in her cross-examination of Stephen Flatley, who's an FBI agent, by questioning the certainty of determining if Maxwell was the one who created the advertisement, as I mentioned before. So that advertisement could be possibly seen as enticing minors to go over to Epstein's house. And at the end of the day, Maureen Comey asked Caroline several direct questions in quick succession, after which she broke into tears. One of many times she got emotional, declaring that Maxwell had ruined her life. Again, this is under oath, people. So I would say very significant. And earlier in the day, her voice got visibly shaken when she was first shown a picture of Epstein, as well as when she relayed Roberts taking off her clothes for getting massaged for the very first time. Also, she was again going to that ideal victim profile, molested by her father or grandfather, molested by her grandfather from the time she was 4 was Caroline, and as I mentioned, her mother was an addict. So, pretty somewhat ruthless cross examination by Polyuka yesterday. Something that I thought was funny is Stephen Flatley, the FBI computer analysis response team coordinator, kept pronouncing Ghislaine's name as Ghislaine. So I thought that was kind of cheeky. Anyways, let me check out the comments here. Looks like we got a decent amount of people tuning in. Let's see. Thank you, Addie, for being on the front line. Appreciate you, Charlotte. If she takes a stand, that will be a barn burner. Presumably talking about Annie Farmer there, Cindy. What about the guards who are supposed to be watching him? Only got community service, no jail time. Connection to that, Maureen Comey was also part of the 2016, what was it, 2019 prosecution, which kind of went cold after Epstein didn't kill himself, which is very interesting. Why does Comey get two of the biggest cases ever? Do I think Ghislaine will take the stand? Asks Cassandra. I would say no. I would be surprised if she did. I would like to see her take the stand, but I don't know if her lawyers would allow her to do that. When does Annie go on the stand? That is a great question. We were told that earlier this week, that she was supposed to take the stand by the beginning of the week, and still nothing left. So it's been contended that they're playing games with Annie Farmer. The defense maybe making sure to drag us on, making her take 2 weeks off work. That was 2 weeks ago, and she's also scheduled to testify first. So it's likely they're dreading Annie Farmer testifying because she is so credible. Maybe trying to psych her out there a little bit, similar to, if anybody knows the American game of football, when the kicker is going up to win the game, the opposite team will take a timeout simply to ice the kicker, try to psych out the kicker so he overthinks himself. And why are Maria Farmer and Virginia Giuffre not testifying? They were not asked to testify because they know too much. And as a whistleblower, they know that Farmer will mention her FOIA. The FBI denied her FOIA in federal court, citing simply CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. So, anytime you want to just get away with anything or cover something up, you just got to cite CIA in federal court, and the judge will allow that, I guess. But Virginia has been contended to be the most important witness in this case by far. But it's probably safe to say the CIA is all over this trial. But let me see these other Addie equals the GOAT. Check out these other comments here. Hey, Addie, thanks for your hard work, especially the information on Michigan. I grew up there, totally forgotten about Fox Island. Really appreciate your coverage of this trial. Appreciate you guys. As an independent, Addie needs our support. Yes, I do. I do indeed. And if you do want to help out, please go in the description box below, and even $2 or $3 will help. If all my followers on Twitter gave me $2, I would have an actual salary. So let that be known. Found you via Robert Gruler, sir. Thank you for going to the courthouse. Sincerely appreciate your time and dedication to us. Wow. Did he tweet me out, or how did you find me via Robert Gruler? Did he shout me out? I'm interested to know, because I actually talked about him earlier today. I wasn't talking crap. I was merely pointing out that he is not here. I think he does great work, but he's not here. Jack Posobiec's not here. And Jack Posobiec is spreading misinformation, saying that jurors are getting threatened last Tuesday, which is just BS. So again, maybe not again. I don't think I've said this before, but I don't have a problem saying it now. I've had people, I'm not going to say who, because you probably know who they are. Maybe you don't. Tell me off air that Posobiec is a DIA informant. As far as I know, he's former Navy intelligence as well. So why does he not get censored? You know, why does Gruber not get censored? That's a good question. I just lost my eighth or ninth channel the other day. Mainstream media pushing Bill Gates' connection. They say Epstein was helping him get Nobel Peace Prize. I am all good for lodging. Thanks for asking, Cindy. I'm good until the first week of January, so that's really fantastic. I'm couch surfing right now, and the guy, gal, person who is allowing me to couch surf very graciously has asked me to set, excuse me, to sit their pet for them while they go away for the holidays. So even if the trial does end early, which maybe is a possibility, I'm not really sure. I'm going to be here in New York until at least 2022. Uh, Maria and Virginia are too dangerous to testify, says Jeremy. I agree, but really looking forward to Annie's testimony as well, Jeremy. Cassandra, CIA is a bunch of child touchers too. Yes, I saw that. I haven't covered that myself, but if people want to check that out, because my hands have been completely full with this Maxwell stuff. But yeah, if people want to check that out, CIA recently got exposed for also being PEDs. You guys know what that means. I'm on YouTube, but you know that's the thing is like maybe I should not just censor myself at all. You know what I'm talking about, folks, because I'm not really allowed on YouTube, and now I'm not allowed on Twitter. I can tweet on Twitter, but you can't tell me that this isn't purposeful. I can't stream on Twitter anymore. All of a sudden, randomly, coincidentally, I blow up on Twitter now after all this work I've done over the past couple of years. And then, now you can't stream during the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, and your biggest audience is on Twitter. Yeah, I'm sure that's a coincidence. Intelligence agencies / technocracy. Uh, they know who they are. Has anyone read Julie Brown's book? Yeah, I have not read that yet. But anyways, folks, I don't want to be long-winded, but we're already at 36 minutes here. Nothing but content straight, folks. I give it to you straight. No chaser. All meat and potatoes, but hopefully there's a little sizzle there on the steak as well. So you know maybe I presented it in a way that you found entertaining. There's the intelligence. Again, I'm going to put it on my Substack, eddieaz@substack.com for days 2 and 3. Please support Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, Patreon. Although try to do those other ones first because Patreon probably is going to censor me at some point if it grows up there. But try to share this out. My Telegram's below, my Twitter, and all my other links. Stay frosty, and we'll see everybody tomorrow.